This podcast is made possible by your support and your donations. Thank you. And by the purchase of my book called Everyday Buddhism, Real-Life Buddhist Teachings and Practices for Real Change. I will post an affiliate link to the book on Amazon in the show notes. And if you've already read it, please take a minute to rate and review. And also consider purchasing it again for a friend or family member as a gift. Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 73 of Everyday Buddhism, making every day better. Have I got an episode for you? In this episode, I talk with Ashley Lynn Olson, not just about her book titled Confined to a Line, but about her life and what she can teach all of us. The blurb about her book says, quote, "It's about the resilience of spirit overcoming life's most challenging obstacles, including a car accident that killed her father and paralyzed her when she was 14 years old," unquote. Now, despite the tragedy revealed in part of that blurb, what she talks with us about in this episode is, in my opinion, way more than that. I don't even think resilience of spirit, quote unquote, measures up to what Ashley models for us and teaches us with her life. Ashley does not identify as a Buddhist. She does identify as spiritual, though, but that's not quite it either. If I could point to a completely true Buddhist attitude or way of thinking in a person, I would point to Ashley. And you'll see why in this conversation. But first, a little more about her background. So 10 years after the accident that killed her father and paralyzed her, Olson faced death again while suffering with and healing from the kind of infection resulting from a pressure sore that Christopher Reeve died of. While she was confined to a special bed 24/7 for 8 weeks, she wrote journal entries, including many poems. But there's more. In early March 2020, Olson yet again faced death, somehow surviving a car accident on the back roads in southern New Zealand. Remaining calm and positive, Olson rescued herself. When she returned home to a world of mandated COVID shutdowns, she was inspired to share her story so others might be reminded of the beauty, joy, and love surrounding us all the time, even when things look the most dire. But that's if we slow down and appreciate, as she says, the small things. Olson is currently continuing to write another book or two, poems, plus she writes magazine and website articles. Olson has written, photographed, and videoed hundreds of articles and guides about travel from the perspective of a wheelchair user for her website, wheelchairtraveling.com, which she developed and launched in 2006. Ashley says she has never considered herself disabled. Let me repeat that. Ashley says she has never considered herself disabled. And with that almost unbelievable statement, she demonstrates something I talk about in this podcast and in my book, and that is not to label anything or anyone, including yourself. Now, that's not something I'm always very good at. And if you're like me, this conversation should help inspire and motivate you to be better. The conversation starts now. Hello, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I've really been looking forward to this.
Thank you so much for having me.
I shared your bio in the introduction to our conversation, but it's helpful if you could tell a summary of your story, in your own words. Me doing your bio, I never figured does it much justice. I like, especially somebody like you who has such a dramatic story. It would be nice to hear you tell it, and if you could like link it into some insight into the seeds or that led to the birth of your book, Confined to a Line. I mean, I do know, kind of it was like the beginning of the pandemic and maybe you were just bored. I don't yet, but no, I know there's probably reasons, and that's I'd like you to share them in your own words. And then if you remember any of this, that's good. If you don't, that's okay. One more thing that I was going to add on there.
Like lots of questions.
Now, well, just for your summary, trying to give an idea where you could head for, right? A brief theme of what you think you have to teach in your book, or in your with your life, because there's a lot you have to share that I think that our listeners would love to hear about the positives of what would normally be seen by many as a profoundly depressing and negative story. So, is that too many things to pinch you on?
It's a lot, but so let me just kind of go with kind of what's popped in my head, and we can just go from there.
Go ahead.
So just let all your readers know, I have a spinal cord injury. I my level is technically T11, L1, L2. And I was paralyzed in a car accident when I was 14 years old. My family was driving to a reunion out in Colorado. We're from the Northern California area. And on our way out there, we were on the border of Nevada and Utah. And our car hit a really horrible monsoon rainstorm, nothing that I had seen before. I recall stopping for lunch before the rainstorm, and it was bright and sunny day, blue skies, hot weather in the middle of the desert, typical from what I figured. And then not long after we ate, all of a sudden the sky just turned black, absolutely black, and lightning was striking 20 feet away from our car. And it was just bizarre to me. I couldn't say that I was fearful. It was just bizarre. I was curious, and just it felt very eerie to me, like I was in a different world. And my mom turns around and says, "Hey girls, make sure you have your seatbelt on. I don't have a very good feeling about this." And in the car it was my mom, my dad, my younger sister, and myself. My older sister wasn't in the car. She was older and working, and a teenager, and just not cool to go on a family trip with us. And so she wasn't in the car, fortunately. And so when my mom turned around and said, "Make sure you have your seatbelts on, girls," I said, "Oh, wait a second, Mom. I dropped a CD," and I unclicked my seatbelt, and our car hydroplaned, started spinning out of control. A sheet of water came on the road, and we fell into a ravine. We rolled off into a ravine. I'm not sure how many times the car rolled. I'm sure it's written somewhere in some police report, but rolled enough. And the side that I was on was completely smashed in, but I was actually thrown out of the back of the vehicle because I didn't have my seatbelt on. But the side of the car that I was on was the same side that my father was sitting, and that side of the car was completely destroyed. I mean, that took the brunt of the impact, and my father died on that impact. His neck immediately snapped. And my mom, her legs were crushed underneath the dashboard. She had multiple surgeries following that. She couldn't walk herself for many, many years. She's basically walking on metal, has all sorts of rods and pins in her legs. And the little sister has minor injuries. She broke her elbow, did a full rotation, and her opposite ankle. And the little sister remembers hearing me in the distance, crying and swearing my head off. And she tried to crawl through broken glass in order to get to me, but passed out herself. And we were there for, I can't remember how long, maybe an hour or 2 hours or so. And luckily somebody did see us, because the way that the the way the path of the road was, there was a ravine, like I said, right next to it. And where our car was positioned, nobody could really see the car unless you were really looking down into that ravine, really stretching your neck. So by the grace of God, somebody found us. His name was John, coincidentally, just like from the Bible, and Angel John. And he went down to assess the situation, saw that my dad had passed, and immediately heard a man's voice pushing him. He literally said that he felt pushed in the direction of where I was. I was thrown 200 feet away from the car and in a bush. Nobody could see me. And so he, walked over to this area, and there I was, black and blue, not breathing. And so he turned me on my side, got me breathing again, and called for help. And my family was airlifted to the LDS hospital in Utah. And on the way there, I passed away. I died. They had to bring me back to life. And then later that night as well, I passed away again. And they definitely told my mom that I wasn't gonna make it. But I did. I did. I woke up and I had a collapsed lung and broken ribs and broken clavicle and breathing tube in me, and all sorts of IVs hooked up to me. And I remember waking up. And the word paralyzed was not in my vocabulary. That just didn't dawn on me, but I knew something was wrong with my legs. I just couldn't physically express it because I was on all these pain meds and everything else. But I knew something was wrong with my legs. I knew I couldn't walk, didn't know the word. And I knew that my dad was gone somehow, some way. I just knew it. I was questioning the nurses because I just wanted some confirmation. And they were very concerned and nervous. They didn't want to give me that information. They didn't want to be the first person to tell me. Right. So they got my grandmother, and she was actually the one to tell me. And so I fought to get those breathing tubes out of me, and learned how to sit up in bed again, which was a nightmare to learn how to do again. Being paralyzed, losing your complete sense of balance. Yeah. It took forever to be able just to sit up and have my arms straight out again. And then after I recovered enough from there, I was sent to rehab, and was at rehab for a while, just learning how to sit up, putting on my pants, being able to function like everybody else. And I was very grateful going through all of this experience that I had an athletic background. I grew up playing soccer and basketball, and I was actually on my way to go to Stanford with a full ride scholarship for basketball. I had the grades, I had the basketball skills. It was a done deal. But as life had it, I was going in one direction. Life wanted me to go in a different direction. But I was grateful because during physical therapy and, all of these steps that I had to take, I knew the course to, not get frustrated with myself and not want to just to be at the finish line. I knew that I had to train. I had to go through training, and get myself up to the right physical strength, and, not get stressed out that I can't put my pants on in 30 seconds.
So what you're saying then is it was your athletic training that gave you the patience and the foresight that this was going to take a while, and that you really had that presence of mind then, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always been like an incredibly patient person, very deep and poetic, and, sports just kind of came in my life as something that I like to do, because I like the release of the mind, when you're just, shooting a basketball, like the whole rest of the world fades away, and I'm just focusing on shooting that basketball. And I could feel something like in my body and mind and soul that kind of allowed everything else just to relax, and then I could go inside and, study or do my homework and, feel refreshed and invigorated, because I wasn't, stressed about in my head the entire time. So I definitely love sports in that regard. So yeah, I definitely used that when I first became paralyzed, in order just to, stay focused and not get upset with myself or my surroundings. Everybody else around me was doing things so much faster and walking around, and I'm like, okay, they've been training longer than I have. I just have to take it one day at a time, and eventually, like, I'm going to be sporty, Miss Sporty wheelchair girl and be able to get around and jump out of airplanes and travel around the world. But not today, one step at a time.
Yeah. So, you, are you paralyzed like from the waist down? Is that it? Or?
Yeah. From like I would say like the top of my like mid thigh.
Oh, mid thigh. Oh, so yeah. So you can sort of twist your upper torso then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause that's when you said it was hard to just sit up. I can imagine. I've had like knee injuries, and just screwing around in bed is sometimes hard because you use your legs to do those things, and you don't even know that you're doing
it. And
yeah.
I guarantee you it's a whole, people can pretend like to not use their legs, or if you get knee surgery or something like that, but there are still muscles firing in those legs and balance points in your body that's helping you to balance. It absolutely amazed me how much you lose and how much I had to retrain myself to balance myself. Because like I said, my mom, her legs were severely crippled after the accident. Her legs were completely crushed. She basically didn't have any legs after the accident. But her balance was significantly different than mine. She had, normal balance. It was hard at times. Sometimes she might wobble a little bit, but it wasn't even close to as unstable as I was.
Well, that's amazing. And, I think you already kind of answered the question that I asked about, like, the sort of the theme of what you have to teach. I think in some ways it's that athletic training that was not just the physicalness of it and the patience of learning to use your body in different ways, but also the mental patience, that I think, well, I know I certainly wouldn't have it. I can tell you that, but I think a lot of people would have trouble. Not it sounds like you almost immediately accepted that you were just going to have to do that, and there you go. And is that true? Or
as you asked me at the very beginning, kind of to talk about this, what kind of came to mind was I never considered myself disabled after I became paralyzed. Never. That word never enter my head.
Even when they said you are paralyzed and you will forever be paralyzed?
Yeah. I was just like, okay, so I just can't walk or stand. Okay. That to me isn't being disabled. I can still drive a car. I can still go to college. I can still dance. I can still, jump out of airplanes. I just can't walk or stand. I can still, go to the grocery store. I can still move around, but it's just the mode of transportation that I'm using.
Amazing. That is amazing. So when this probably has something to do with the idea or the seeds. You said you've always been have that poetic sensibility. Clearly you have a philosophical bend too from reading your book. So what did someone say you should write a book, or did you say I should write a book?
I've definitely always been writing poems throughout my whole life. So I've always kind of envisioned one day, putting together a book of poetry. That's always been in the back of my mind. I've had a couple of poems published throughout the years in random places, but nothing, that big or, to celebrate, but just, little things. And so I've always loved to write. When I was a little girl, I wished to be an artist or a writer when I grew up. That's all I wanted to do. But then I also knew too that I didn't think that it was also possible. I was confused on how I was actually going to make that possible, because logically I knew I wasn't going to be, a Stephen King, or, the chances of me being, like a big time Hollywood screenwriter or something like that, chances are, I don't know, not to say that wasn't impossible, but I kind of knew what odds I was up against. If I wanted to be a writer, that to me, if I wanted to have a career as a writer, that to me was the only way of being successful, is that you had to make it really, really big. Mm-hmm. And, the whole blogging world, that wasn't, invented yet. and just the freedom of, being like a self-publishing, and, how flexible, getting workout today is, that wasn't, available then. So I couldn't envision that then, but I wanted to write. And so, when I first started my website, wheelchairtraveling.com, it definitely was an outlet for me. So I could talk about, of course, tips and tricks and, some of those basic fundamental stuff, but then I could also like throw in a couple of like beautiful phrases and play on words and, little touches to really enjoy the writing aspect of what I was doing. And just everything that I had been through, like being paralyzed and after the fact, and, loving writing and everything. I knew there was a book in me for sure. Like it was hands down, even going through college, but it was kind of my feeling that I just had to go through a little bit more. I needed to have a little bit more experience to have people be able to relate to me in order to be able to express myself a little bit better.
And little did you know that the sort of experience you had to go through to get this to happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so so my book, Confined to Aligned, is about this time of my life in 2010, about 10 years ago, when I had to have surgery for a pressure sore. This pressure sore is from sitting, too long, basically sitting on very, very hard surfaces that I wasn't aware of when I first became paralyzed. When I first became paralyzed, I would jump on the ground, or I would sit in a hard plastic seat at school, or just any and everything. Like I didn't think about it. I was just like, okay, it's fine. It's flat. I can sit on it. It's fine. But I don't have as much cushion, on my lower extremities as I would like. And so, that skin just kind of breaks down, especially if you're sitting a lot. And if you're sitting on something really hard and your bone is then rubbing against it, that's just a recipe for a pressure sore. But it was a very small one. It was a tiny, teeny size of a pea, and as shallow as if you were to fall and skim your knee. So just basically nothing. I didn't think much of it. I would put a small little Band-Aid on it, and I would go to the nurses, and they would look at it and clean it and say, okay, you're doing a good job. Just keep doing what you're doing. Try to stay off of it. And I'm like, okay, I'll try to stay off of it. Being paralyzed, in college, I'll try to stay off of it, and do the best that I could. And, but it didn't heal. It wouldn't heal. And finally I saw this nurse, and she was like, oh, what's this freckle on the wound? And she poked it, and ended up being a track leading up to my bone, which could instantly lead to a bone infection or blood infection. And of course, after a certain point, it's irreversible. So it's definitely serious business. It's what Christopher Reeve died from. And he had all the money in the world to have assistance be taken care of. So it's definitely something in the paralyzed world that we have to be aware of. So I had to get surgery, which means they had to go in and debride it, which ended up not being enough. They actually then had to go have a second surgery, and I had to do a skin flap, which they take muscle from my leg and kind of place it over the infected area after they debride it, so some healthy tissue can attach itself and grow. But that second surgery, well, they both actually required a lot of bed rest afterwards. Like I just had to be in bed. That was the doctor's orders. Period. Like the end, like I could only get up to go to the bathroom after the first surgery, and that was it. But the second surgery, I couldn't even get up out of bed to go to the bathroom. I was in a nursing home, placed in a nursing home. Well, it was called a short-term care facility, but it was basically a nursing home. I was by far the youngest person there by like 40, 50 years. And a lot of people there, had strokes or, recovering from surgeries or falls and that kind of a thing. And I had multiple roommates, and for 24 hours for 8 weeks, I had to lay flat on my back to heal in the specialized bed. I couldn't even sit up to take a pill or, drink a glass of water. I had to lay completely flat 24/7, 8 weeks. So I was really actually getting into meditation right before that, ironically. And I really wanted to do some kind of retreat. I'm like, oh, yes, I really want to escape. And, I really wanted to be forced to, do meditation. Like have everything, go on a retreat, and for a weekend or a week, just no cell phones and just really, commit to this whole like meditation theory and figure it
Be
out.
careful what you wish
I know. And so God was just like, oh, you wanted just a week or a weekend? Oh, no. I'm going to give you 8. I'm going to give you 8 weeks. And so, I mean, I kind of knew that when it was kind of starting too, that this is what the path that God wanted me to do, even though it was uncomfortable, but I accepted the uncomfortable aspects of my environment until they just didn't become uncomfortable anymore, until they just were, mediocre. I wasn't bothered by them. So as I was going through this as well, I'm just like, oh my goodness, like there's so much that I'm learning from this. Like, this is so profound. I'm like, oh, this is definitely going to be added into my book that I write one day. This is definitely going to be added into like this big book of what I learned when I was young after the accident and all these different stories and people that I met. I'm definitely going to be adding this hospital story in. But then when COVID happened and everybody was locked down and feeling very frustrated, they couldn't go and travel and go to work and go sit at cafes and just do all the things that they normally do. They felt that their freedom was restricted. I wanted to shout to the rooftops that, hey guys, wait, you can still go outside. You can still breathe and get together with family members and go for a hike. And no, you maybe can't travel to China or, to Europe as you wanted, but there's still this whole other world around you. There's parks, there's amazing things in your own backyard that you need to explore that maybe you haven't explored. And so I really just wanted to remind people, one, yes, this is a story about being confined. This is a real story about being locked down. And then I wanted people to see that and be reminded like, oh yes, no, I can still go outside. Like I still have some freedoms. There's still gifts that I have in my life. I can still feel the sunshine on my body and hear the birds and, smell flowers. And yeah, just going for a walk to me is such a gift. And so I just wanted to remind everybody of that. And then, of course, remind everybody about, all the internal strength that we have as well,
well,
resilience.
That's the thing I was going to comment. You actually have gone beyond where my next question was. Because I told you when we talked previously that the format of your book captured me when we talked prior to doing recording. And I should explain to people this book has a unique format of it's a combination of poetry and journal entries, which to some people might sound really boring or something like. I think even one of your reviewers said, I bought this book because I thought it would help me sleep. And then I ended up reading it all in one night. And that's the sort of thing that happened to me when I didn't think I didn't do it for sleeping, but I just whipped right through the thing because it was just so fascinating to kind of, it was like getting into where your mind was, because, poetry, it means, I'm a hack poet, I call myself. I in my book there's poetry too, but it's like poetry, everybody can take from it what they will. So it's like it speaks to each person in a different way. But then your journal entries are clearly personal journal entries about what you're going through. So the thing is I felt your moments of despair and depression I felt moments of despair, not your moments, but my moments of despair and depression for what you were going through. But it was your unbelievable spirit and ability to steer your thoughts in a positive direction that kept coming to the fore throughout this book. And it was like rescuing me from the despair and the depression. Talking about the pandemic, a review of your book, a reviewer, the person's name was Louise, wrote that about the lockdown. She said, we all got frustrated in 2020, but to read this book made you think you need to check yourself at the door. It was full of enlightenment, perseverance, humor, and reflection of the author trying to gear down to the most basic needs and find peace within our limited surroundings. It is a lesson in extreme tolerance, patience, and drawing on one's own strengths. A must read to find it in yourself too. And so, what this reviewer commented on was something I kept thinking about when I read your book too. I kept thinking about this, although your story is about your wound healing adventures and about your initial paralysis and the hospitalization and the confinement that came with that, but it doesn't speak to only people who suffered in that way.
Oh yeah. No, that's definitely not the focus at all.
We have all felt confined in some ways, even before the pandemic. There's always times you can feel confined, but as the reviewer pointed out, the pandemic brought that feeling home in full force to many of us. And can you say more about what you learned in the experiences of your life and what you wrote about in that book that would speak to those feeling frustrated or even angry at having their normal, quote, normal life seemingly being taken away? You sort of already did, but one of the things that I heard you say, but in between the words just now, is like, there was this little, and I know you didn't mean it in a negative way, but there's this little sarcasm about, I know you can't go to a cafe and I know you can't, but I hear you. It's like, I was even feeling like that to people. It's like, cause I have an autoimmune condition. So, although I don't feel disabled, there are things that I haven't been able to do there. And then during lockdown, I was more locked down than most because my immune system is compromised. So it's like, I kept thinking that these people complaining about not going on trips and not going to meet their friends in a cafe, it just made me feel like, well, you brat. And then when I read your book, I was like, oh man, that is totally where I see that what you could teach, that even in a life other than normal or other than what we think normal should be. Because I think if anything, what people who are aware could take home from this pandemic is there is never a normal, really, and it's only in your perception. So even
all
if
in the perception, that's right. 100% true. Yes.
Even if you are forced, to live this different kind of life, you can have a beauty and a peace that escapes our view when we are living normally, right?
Yeah.
We don't
you could be a billionaire with places all around the world, but you could actually feel locked down all the time based on, your life and your schedule, because, you have people following you the moment you wake up. People are, demanding of you, and you're expected to do this and this and this. You're not really in control of your life, and you're just kind of, pushed around and expected to do all these certain things. And so it really could happen to anyone. It could be any scenario, any situation, whether you're rich, poor, male, female, it doesn't matter.
And what you're saying there, that's the key. That's kind of where I was trying to go with this. It's like, even though we're living, quote unquote, think we're living normally, we're missing out on the beauty and peace that you found when you were confined, right?
Yes, all those tiny things, all those very tiny things, those beautiful patterns, those geometric patterns, that God puts out there, the pattern of a flower, and how symmetrical it can be, and how it looks like a star. And if you keep looking at it, there's a star within a star within a star within a star, it reflects infinity, But you may have not paid attention to those things before. You may have just been like, oh, walking by, okay, there's a flower. Yeah, I see flowers all the time. It's just a flower. But because we had a little bit more time on our hands, I felt like we were able to just slow down a little bit more and pay attention to some of those details. Be like, okay, yeah, there's a flower. Well, let me just look a little closer. I have nothing else to do. Well, let me just go a little bit closer, and then, getting lost in it.
Yeah. And in your book, you talk about, I don't have the exact passage pulled out, but in your book, you talk about this one little tree outside your hospital window and looking at the leaves, and you would spend hours, where the rest of us, I know people, and I've experienced this too. Sometimes you don't even notice that when, like, if you're like, I have a a whole row of burning bushes outside my house on one side of the yard, and I'm always trying to catch when, first of all, when the leaves come, right, when you first see the first leaves, and not, the trees are easy because there's this like wash of light green and you can catch it. But when I was looking at those, and I always make myself say, okay, I'm going to catch when the leaves first pop, and then I'm going to, in the fall, I'm going to catch when they start going red. And it's like, normally if you're like rushing around in a busy life, you might not even notice that the leaves have gone totally red until they were starting to drop, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the you really capture that completely when you when the way you talk about like that tree outside your window and so forth. And it's like, is that something you did prior to being confined?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, even before I became paralyzed, my mom loves to remind me how I would love to run ahead the family when we'd be hiking somewhere. I would run ahead from everybody. And then, my mom would be all concerned, like, wait, where's Ashley? Where did she go? Where did she go? And they would find me just sitting by myself, like on a rock or a tree stump or something like that, just by myself in nature, just wanting just to be immersed fully in nature with like nobody else, opinions or demands upon me. I just wanted to be, right there in nature. So I've always had a very, very intimate relationship with nature.
And also
actually,
powers of observation, which is it's a skill that a writer gets, is your powers of observation seem very well tuned. And you had that prior to your accident?
Yeah. Powers of observation, noticing all the little things, but then simultaneously being able to also then kind of see those little things and how they make up the bigger picture. So seeing, all the cells and, the worms and the caterpillars and whatnot, and then being able to see, okay, we need all of this in order to create this beautiful environment. This beautiful environment doesn't happen unless we have all of these little tiny things working together.
Yeah, it's like Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if you've read any Thich Nhat Hanh, says about interbeing, and that's the Buddhist concept of interdependency. It's like I don't happen except for you, right? Now that's a stretch because we don't even know each other, but really, except for right now. But it's we are, everything in my life is happens because of every other thing in my life, right?
Yes.
And vice versa. So in case people think you're some superhuman being, I want to read another one of your poems that reflect, well, I mean, I want to show that you have a human side too, because you seem a little superwomanish at this point, right? you seem.
Oh, I can be super down to earth,
Oh,
definitely.
okay.
Well, I mean, I'm down to earth, but I don't know. I'm just a very spiritual person, but I have troubles and frustrations just like everybody else.
Yeah, in one of your poems, you wrote this. I'm just going to take 2 verses from the poem. It's a longer poem, but quote, "It's hard to live day by day and never knowing where this path will lead and if I'm growing. The finish line is out of sight. Every moment, a constant fight. I want my life back. I want my freedom back." Unquote. And so, like I said, I wanted to share this to show that you're not some abnormally positive person.
Oh, yeah. This is definitely not a book where I'm just like, oh, yes, I figured it all out, folks. And, like, I'm so much better than you. Like, no. Like, this is why I also wanted to put this out there to show, like, the raw, negative side or emotions, where I did suffer. Like, I wasn't in a great place, but I really worked hard to get myself out of that space.
Yeah. Well, can you talk about maybe some of the things, and we'll get into some of it later, maybe too, but some of the things that enabled you to get out of those dark places, right? Like, I mean, an average person, a person who isn't paralyzed, who isn't flat on their back for 8 weeks, unable to move, there are going to be days where you're going to say, this stinks. You know what I mean? It's like, and you just,
Yeah.
you swirl around, the story swirl, you can't get yourself out of it. You know, how do you, what would be some of your, clue us in as some of your little tips and tricks on how to, not wheelchair traveling tips and tricks, but how you saw things brighter when you, at that moment when you're inside of you is screaming, I want my life back.
To focus on the simple things. I think there might have been a poem in the book. There was a poem that somehow did not make it in the book, unfortunately. But it's called Simplicity. And I can't remember if I made it in the book or not. But it's basically, just really taking in all of those tiny, tiny, tiny little wonderful, simple things that make life and existence more enjoyable, but taking time to acknowledge them and not rush through them and being like, okay, this feels good. Like, I appreciate this. Like, when the nurse every morning would come in with, a pink basin of warm water, in a washcloth, and she would hand me a washcloth and I got to put a warm washcloth on my face. I mean, not only did I think about all the love and care that she had just, provided me, and who she was as a soul and, the relationship that we have, which was very important. But then, I mean, I even thought of, the factory workers who even made this plastic bin, possibly in a different country, in this wash rag that I was using on my face, all of these things that had to come together so I could feel a little refreshed, so I could feel a little bit of warmth on my face after sleeping.
Oh, that is so Buddhist. That's really good. And it is true. It's usually when we're telling ourselves negative stories and we get trapped in those, if we can just, change our focus on something like watching a fly on the outside of the window, or in my case, sometimes I can bring myself out of stuff by just feeling my feet. You can't feel your feet, but maybe you feel your
on the outside, but I can fit on the inside, which is always kind of a weird thing to try to explain.
What do you mean?
Exactly. Where it just feels like, I don't know, there's like a shell where it's like, I can't feel if you were to like tickle my feet, I couldn't feel that, but I can feel my blood flowing on the inside. I mean, like when your feet would fall asleep, if you're sitting,
right,
like too long and whatnot, and they're numb and you can't, I mean, if you were to touch them on the outside, you can't really feel them. They've gone numb,
right.
But you can feel all the tingling on the inside. That's kind of what my legs feel like all the time.
You feel tingling or just
tingling, but sometimes I actually do feel like, blood rushing or stagnant or.
Oh, really? Oh, so interesting. So I guess you could feel your feet. So yeah,
in a way, but not like how you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if I feel my feet on the floor, it's like, maybe it's also a grounding, and it's like, it takes me out of my head and puts me back into my body, which I think in many ways is so important when you're like, spinning those I want my life back stories, you know?
Oh, touching the earth is a huge one for me. I mean,
touching
a tree, and just, like holding it, putting your hand, on the
right
on the tree itself, and just feeling it for a moment and just giving thanks, that the tree is there. I on a daily basis, I thank trees for being around and being in my environment and still existing and guiding all of us.
So, I want to say your publicity person reached out to me to make me aware of your book. And I always like to tell people how I came to know this book or this person. And I was somewhat skeptical, be honest with you, of the relevancy to my podcast listeners. I mean, this is a Buddhist podcast. So it was like, okay, why? I mean, it's not that I didn't want to read the book and it wasn't fascinating to me. I just didn't know how I was going to work it into a podcast. But then the plot thickens. I read the book in one day, as I said, because it was one of those kind of reads. And I saw so many Buddhist messages like the one you just delivered here. And I'll quote another example of something you wrote that I think is absolutely brilliant. Quote, observation without attachment, including of my own emotions, became the daily practice, a technique reiterated by meditation masters over the centuries. See the world without being offended, without the personal baggage filter. Just let it be and be, unquote. That's similar to what we were
Yes.
just talking about, but wow,
Yes, acceptance.
Ashley.
Acceptance.
Yeah,
I like absolute acceptance for whatever situation that you're in, and don't get frustrated if you can't, accomplish something or go on the path the way that somehow your brain has envisioned, like, oh no, this is the only way to do this and be and accomplish something, because that's not true. Like, there's absolute infinite ways that any of number of things can be possible. And specifically from my book, it reminds me of a moment when I dropped my TV remote. It's either my TV remote or my nurse call button, or it could have been a combination of the two. I can't remember if it was one of those devices that had them both on it. But either way, I dropped the call button and it completely was out of my reach. And I remember feeling like a flood of, just olfactory emotions, just like, oh, you're paralyzed. You can't get up and get this remote. You have to lay down. You can't walk. You can't walk. You can't get it. But then after I accepted it, it was like, I saw this. I'm like, okay, I see that you're feeling this right now. That's fine. That's fine. I'll sit you right here, on the shelf or whatever, like I won't forget about you, like you're right there. It's fine. I acknowledge that you exist. But okay, now that we've acknowledged you, is there anything else? Is there anything else that's possible? Is there anything else that can be done? And then, an idea popped in my head, like, no, I couldn't get out of this bed and, walk up and, pick up the remote. Oh, but I could grab this hanger or this little device this little hook that I had found, and just use that to basically just fish for the device. And in 2 seconds, it was back in my hand with basically no effort whatsoever.
See, now that's it. And what you said there about in that quote, you said observation without attachment. That's something that, there's a lot of Buddhist practitioners who try to get that sort of awareness and can't. And some who aren't even aware that is kind of what meditation is all about, and awareness is all about, and awakeness is all about. You said earlier that you were getting into meditation, and so how did you get to this like almost advanced level of meditative awareness? Did you read a book? Did you go on a retreat prior, or how did this come to you?
So yeah, like I said, I wanted to do a meditation retreat, but that didn't happen. I was like looking into some and, had booked a trip, but then ended up having to cancel it because I was hospitalized. But fortunately, I can't remember who recommended. Oh, it was a girlfriend of mine recommended me the book A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. So that was the first book that I read that definitely kind of opened me up to what I was already kind of experiencing, and things that I had already known previously, but it was just put in different ways and definitely allowed me to expand on different things. And from that, a family friend of mine, my mom's good friend, she is very spiritual, and she actually had a bunch of meditation tapes from all different kinds of masters, that she has collected over the years. Some incredible masters. I'm sure if I name them all off, like you would know every single one that I'm talking about. But it was really funny though, because they were cassette tapes, not CDs. They were cassette tapes, when we were in 2010. And so my mom shows up with this box of tapes, and I'm like, great, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah, and who has a cassette player
yeah,
anymore?
Exactly. Like, does anybody have a cassette tape player anymore? And so my mom actually spent like an entire day, like going from different drugstores and grocery stores and Radio Shacks and stuff like that, trying to find a cassette tape player, which he found eventually. And so I listened to these tapes. I didn't watch TV like at all. There was actually the World Series, the Giants were in the World Series, and since I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, that was definitely something fun to kind of watch and be a part of. But for the most part, I just was observing my environment and just listening to these meditation masters and trying to apply what they were saying in a hospital environment, which I thought would be like the ultimate school of testing like some of their theories.
I would definitely say so. I would, that's, you say you're writing another book. That should be part of your second book. It's like, it should be about, your whole meditative experience. But
yeah, definitely.
Did you share what you were learning with your nurses and doctors, or they didn't care?
Well, the doctors were definitely not really,
they don't care.
But the nurses, there was definitely, none of the nurses actually work there anymore. So I'm so sad that I want to share this book with them, because it really reflects like how much they mean to me. And none of them work there. I went to the hospital and none of them work there. And I'm still going to try to get them the book somehow, but they were kind of really weird about giving me their address and which I totally understand for lots of reasons. So I haven't given up on that. So I'm still very hopeful that maybe one day I'll still be able to share this with them. But yes, as I was going through, listening to some of these tapes and, reading some of these books, I would ask them, I'm like, well, what do you think of this? I heard this. And it actually very much encouraged them, because they're in a short-term care facility, like I said, basically a nursing home, where there's just all sorts of shenanigans going on all the time. They're completely overworked, overstressed, understaffed, all that kind of stuff. So for me, just to kind of, remind them of like a little bit of peace and a little piece of like, of wisdom, that yes, this is just one layer of, one piece of the puzzle, and there's just so many other pieces, to this puzzle that we call life, that they really, really appreciate it. And I felt like by me expressing it, then it allowed me to internalize it then even more so. So it was just like this mirror of sharing and understanding, which was very beautiful.
Yeah, that's kind of why I asked the question, because sometimes when you're working with something that's kind of new like that, unless you like talk it out, it doesn't get cemented in. So I thought that was great. Another quote I'd like to share. I just have to share so many quotes, and I'm not sharing so many that people shouldn't buy the book. Trust me, there's plenty more. So another quote I'd like to share that I think is so important in how to get through life following, in Buddhism, we have the Eightfold Path, which is right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right living, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. I think you exhibited a lot of that in your book. But one of the things that I think is critical and important, and something I talk about a lot in when I teach and in my podcast, is this little quote. Quote, swallowing one's ego all the time is quite the challenge, but it can certainly be done, and I'm up for it. First step is to be aware of it, unquote. And see, that's the thing about awareness is so important. I have, people I teach, and Sangha members say to me, I want to do this. I want to meditate, or I want to do this bow every morning saying unity, and I want to do a bow every night saying thankfulness, and I want to do this, and I want to have gratitude. And so they have the intention, right? So they have the right intention. But the problem, we have the intention to like do something, think something, speak something differently. But it's a completely other story to remember to do that, right? It's you want to do it, but you don't remember to do it. How did you come to remember to be aware? What was your practice?
I think I was in a special situation because I was so isolated for the most part, most of the day, and I had such little interaction with the outside world that when I did have the chance to interact with somebody, that I was never operating on like I was never operating like a robot, you know. I was always
Right.
so very conscious about everything that I was saying and feeling, and really just trying to, yeah, give it space and time and
Right.
understand it. And sometimes, of course, again, not perfect, you know, if a girlfriend would come over and I might get carried away and chatty, and um I would feel myself switch into a different mindset where I could feel myself feeling more anxious or feeling, you know, not good enough, or that something was wrong. That was one of the main flags, which is like I would feel like that something was wrong, you know, that a girlfriend was visiting me and, oh no, I shouldn't be laying down. I should be, you know, fully dressed and have my makeup on and, be just like them, you know, but and how I was wrong. And that wasn't the case. Anytime that something was just like, oh, this is wrong, you know, like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, wait. Is it? Is it wrong? Is it wrong? Is there anything really wrong with this moment? And so I was able just to continuously, you know, check in with myself. And that's why I feel like during the pandemic, I feel like it really was such a gift if people were open to it, that it really allowed them in order to explore this whole aspect of life.
Yeah, I agree with you. I railed about that a lot. A lot. I had a lot of podcasts. I did a special series of podcasts, and actually, I have a sangha that's virtual, and then I opened up another sangha that was totally open and to the public because I thought people needed to have somebody to talk about it with it and maybe look at things in a different way. Because I was totally with you. It's like what a perfect opportunity, to stop and smell the roses because that's all you got to do.
Yeah,
I
perspective, you know, like,
yeah.
can I be upset, you know, that I can't travel to Europe, or, you know, travel to a different country, or travel to across the country? That could be one perspective. Or I could have the perspective, oh, wait, I have a little bit more time. We're all looking for more time. Like, I have no time to, you know, learn a new language. I have no time to read a book. I have no time to, you know, take better care of my health. I have no time to learn how to meditate. And this was the time that I feel like life gave everybody. Be like, you know what? You said you had no time. Here you go.
Here you
Whatever
go.
you were interested in, whatever you needed to have put more work towards, you know, family life, relationships, personal relationships, whatever, your own self, like your relationship with nature, like, here you go. Like, here's an opportunity. Like, take advantage of it. You're not going to
I
get it again, probably.
I remember sitting on my sun porch, and it was probably April of 2020, and watching the birds. I'm a big
Hmm.
nature freak too, and so I was
I love
watching.
bird watching.
Yeah, I was watching the birds at the feeder, and all I kept thinking is, and I was writing poetry at the time too because it was a good time to just quietly write poetry, and I never had time before. So
Yeah. And what I think like was really great is that, like, with poetry, sorry for interrupting
no,
you.
that's okay. No, 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 no.
But like with poetry, like you were talking about the time, what I loved being in the hospital is that, with the poetry that I would write, because I had so much time, I didn't force anything. I would literally just wait. I would wait. I would be staring at that tree
Ah.
outside, and I'd be waiting and waiting and waiting. I would wait for a phrase. And sometimes the phrase would come, and I would analyze it. I'm like, is that beautiful enough? Does that really speak to me? You know, or could this be said a little bit better? And maybe it could, maybe it couldn't. Maybe I lost, the best phrase. Maybe, maybe I didn't. But I felt whatever I needed to say, like, would come, and whatever I felt like really needed to be written down is what I would write down. And I did write down every single phrase because I didn't feel like all of them, were valid or
Right,
were
right.
really, really true. So I waited. And sometimes, like, it would literally be all day and I would only write like maybe 7 lines.
Yeah, and that's the best way to write poetry. And I remember sitting there thinking though the whole time, and I was interrupted my poetry writing, and it wasn't interrupted because the whole time I'm just looking out, watching the birds and looking at everything going on, and appreciating the difference in how the whole neighborhood sounded because there was no rush hour. I didn't hear the trucks on the freeway. It was like,
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
this is like just a very different experience, but one I kept the phrase that kept coming through my mind is the birds don't know there's a pandemic. And it's like that was the thing that that sounds like really stupid, but it was a thing that made me feel so secure. It was like the birds don't know that. Look at them; they don't know that there's a
Yeah. Yeah.
pandemic.
They're acting the same, the trees are still there, like
Yes,
these are like our grounding,
yeah,
foundations of life.
right. So anyway, and here I go quoting you again. And this is what I wrote that I think is the clincher to living a content or happy life despite what happens to us. And we've touched on this before because whenever we say this word, you go ballistic, I notice. A quote: with paralysis, I was given the lesson of being still, accepting what is, unquote. And that's it, isn't it? Accepting what is. My
Yeah.
teacher taught this phrase, and he got it from his father, who was his teacher. And we just lost our teacher unexpectedly. He passed away in March. So this phrase means more to me. He taught, this was the word: acceptance is transcendence. And they would make the is with the emphasis,
Yeah.
because we don't usually transcend our negative circumstances. We deal with them, right? And that kind of acceptance is kind of passive, right? It's like resignation. Oh, I guess I got to accept it. What am I going to do? Right. But there is a dynamic and positive acceptance, which clearly you've embraced. And that acceptance is the acceptance of change, is the acceptance of things happen, and nothing stays the same. There's constant change. 1 minute you're walking, the next minute you're paralyzed. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the nature of life, right? And
that's the only constant.
yeah, was it your accident that taught you that acceptance the hard way? You said, though, before at the beginning of this conversation, I've always been incredibly patient. Is your patience part of the like little trick to your acceptance, or you know what I'm saying? Or do you get my question?
Possibly. Possibly. Patience definitely. I feel like they overlap. I feel like it's kind of the same thing. And I feel like patience is acceptance. Like
Yeah, right.
whatever the situation is. Like you're okay with it. You're patient with the present moment.
Yeah, because if you're patient, something I lack, by the way, if you're patient, you're patient enough to wait out the change, right? And because that's what I always say, there's there's a philosophical concept, and my listeners know this, in Buddhism, and it's called emptiness. And emptiness doesn't mean empty; it means full of possibility. And emptiness means there's nothing, including a self, that's discrete. In other words, a discrete self, a discrete experience, a discrete moment in time, because everything is interacting with it all constantly, and it's constantly changing. So if one has the gift of patience, which you clearly do, then you can outwait the change. And I always say the gift of emptiness is, don't worry about it. If your day is crappy today, don't worry about it. It's going to change. Tomorrow might be good.
Yeah. And I feel like with patience, I feel like I always look at, okay, just like what's possible at the same time, so patience, what's possible? Like what can I do right now? Like I'm lying in bed. Can I get up? No, can't get up and run around. I can't, go to the movies with my friends. What can I do? I can go internally. I can write poems. I can work on a book. I can, maybe create like a new project. Maybe I can do drawings and I don't know, like just work on something else, learn a new language. Like I can do something else. Like there's never, no possibilities. There's maybe you have to change courses. Maybe you have to change that perspective, and look at things a little bit differently, but there's always possibilities. And that to me is is such a joy to life. And I feel like such a gift becoming paralyzed and learning that at such a young age and having that really be embedded in me and everything that I do, throughout my life. And I'm still relatively young and I still have way more life to live. And I know it's going to stay with me.
That's
no matter
awesome.
what.
Yeah, exactly. And one more quote, and this is the last one, I promise. I'm like doing your whole book, right?
Hardly, but
hardly, no. Just these are. I just took snippets to show people how wise you are for your. If anybody, this is not a video podcast, so nobody can see what a young, beautiful person you are. But they can tell in your voice, I think, how young you are and your enthusiasm. So, but you wrote, choose to choose. Feeling confined is a choice. Choose compassion for yourself and those around you. Choose to see your situation as an opportunity to expand internally, or better yet, as a moment in time space to realign and focus on your path of well-being and purpose. And that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to do. How do you make that choice when you're feeling overwhelmed and depressed? And you just told us, I think you said it's what else is possible, right?
Yeah. So maybe, you're laying in a hospital bed and like nothing seems good. Okay. What are something good to focus on? A warm washcloth. Okay. That is good. The loving care of a nurse. Okay. That is good. There's a tree outside that I can see. Okay. That is good. Just, it could be very small things. It could be very even insignificant to what most people's standards are, today, but just find those little itty bitty tiny things. And just like law of attraction, I mean, there's science behind this, like it just keeps growing. So focus on what does make you happy, what does bring you joy, and more things are just going to naturally be drawn to you.
Perfect. That's the perfect way to end, but I don't want to end. There's a couple things I want to point to. I talk about it at the beginning, but I want you to plug it yourself. You're quite the traveler. And no one would probably believe it, although you hinted at jumping out of an airplane. And you formed this. I've just blanked on it. It's wheelchair traveling. Is that it?
Yes, wheelchairtraveling.com.
Yeah, okay. It's going to be in my show notes, but I just blanked for a minute. Wheelchairtraveling.com. The website is amazing. I'm not in a wheelchair. I don't even like to travel, so there you go. But it's like I looked at this and it's like it's an amazing website. The tips and tricks about the size of wheelchairs, and you look for this and look for that, and you can go here and you can go there. And so if you would
possibilities.
If you would like to plug this or talk anything about it, now's the time. Go for it, Ashley.
Yeah. So, I mean, like my site is definitely a big passion of mine because I want people, no matter what their mobility is, and it's all going to change. I'm paralyzed. I can't walk at all, but I might be able to do more than somebody who's able-bodied, and vice versa. When I get, when you start aging, like you get a little bit more limited on how far you can walk, where you can go. So I really kind of detail, hiking trails and about flying on an airplane, and how long a trail is, and what is it like to take a tour, in Egypt, like how accessible is that going to work? And what are the bathrooms like? And how am I going to get around? All of those details. And of course I have, tour companies and hotels and Airbnbs and different tour companies around the world that I represent. And something that I would actually think I rather end with, because I feel like it kind of also reflects, the power of perception and, controlling your thoughts and your actions and such. My last trip that I took, my last international trip that I took was to New Zealand, and it was right before the pandemic. I actually came home right as President Trump was closing the borders. He literally closed the borders. I was in the air when the borders were closed. And so I came in on the Saturday and they let me through. But 2 days before I came home, I was actually in a car accident. I was driving to a lake, and on the way back, it was a one-lane dirt road, very rocky. My car didn't have 4-wheel drive, and the road kind of bent down into the right. And in this one particular area, no other spot on the road, but this one particular area, the stretch had all compact rocks. So when my tires hit it, I immediately started sliding, very much parallel to the accident that paralyzed me.
Right.
Very much parallel. And so I'm sliding, and on the east side of the road, there are these very deep gutters. And I'm thinking, okay, I need to stay in the center of the road. If I hit one of these gutters, it's gonna flip me. But the car's just too heavy, can't hold it. Car hits the gutter, go flying into the air. And I remember so very clearly and feeling so calmly, like nonchalantly even, just like, okay, this is happening. In full acceptance. Like, it was, to me, it's still kind of weird, like how calm I felt. But I'm like, okay, yeah, like, it's no big deal. Okay, this is happening. Like, it was almost like a Disneyland ride. Like, okay, this is no big deal. And blacked out for a minute, woke up to the car still rolling. Remember seeing the passenger side window above me and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to crawl out of this window being paralyzed. But luckily the car kept rolling and it landed upright. Airbags didn't deploy, and the car still worked, thank goodness. But I couldn't go back the way I came. The ravine, bushes, and the fence and everything was just too mangled. But I figured there had to be a gate somewhere. I was in a fence, there had to be a gate somewhere. So I went driving around the perimeter looking for a gate, found it, but it was about halfway up this really big hill. And there was no way that I could stay in the car to open it, just the way the gate was positioned. So I actually had to get out of the car in my wheelchair, wheel over super soft dirt, which was basically like quicksand going over, just crazy difficult. And then rung by rung, I climbed up the fence, literally like rung by rung, like a cliffhanger, until I reached the latch. Couldn't reach the latch, and was just sitting there. I screamed for help a couple times. Of course, I tried to call, their 911, but I had no cell phone reception in the middle of nowhere. And, I just couldn't reach it. But I'm like, you know what? There's nothing else that I need to do right now but reach this latch. That's the only thing. That's the only thing that I need to do. That's my only task right now. So this is just what has to happen. And I was just envisioning, Go Gadget, that cartoon from the late 80s, early 90s. And I'm like, okay, somehow my arm just has to reach longer. That's just what has to happen. And eventually it did. The latch clicked open. It almost knocked me out of my wheelchair, but didn't. Scaled back down the hill. The ground was so soft, though, knocked myself out of my wheelchair. But then at that point, I'm like, this wheelchair is worthless anyway. So I threw it in the car, got myself into the car, tried to go up the hill, but there was no traction. The car was smoking, tried a couple times, didn't work. So what I had to do was, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have to, climb up this hill. And the reason why I wanted to go up this hill too is because the road was on the other side of this hill. And I knew if to be rescued, I had to get back to this road. And so I threw my bag out. It had my passport and stuff. And luckily, New Zealand has very strong grass, very deeply rooted. And I used it as a rope. I would pull with one hand and push with my other hand, and pulled myself up this ravine. And it was so funny because I was so grateful. I was so grateful for so many things. I could have just not have asked for a better accident. Like every single, yes, I was in an accident. Yes, I was in an accident. But I literally could not have asked for a better scenario in every single step that I had been taking. And I just felt so grateful. The weather was perfect. I wasn't worried about any snakes or weird creatures, coming at me or anything like that. I felt safe. And I was so grateful for this New Zealand grass, because without it, I wouldn't have been able to climb up this ravine. It would have just taken me forever. I mean, not to say I couldn't, but it would just been horribly difficult, more difficult. And I remember screaming a couple times, like, thank you, New Zealand grass. I love you. And then just cracking up, I was just having like a fun time with it. And I knew I was going to be rescued. No fear. I wasn't scared at all. And when I got to the top, I rested a little bit, and I saw 2 hawks flying above me, which was definitely a sign of my father. Whenever I see hawks or I hear hawks, I know it's just my dad being like, hi, or you're okay, or it's going to be okay. And so, but I still had to get to the road, because there was a barn and a shed, and the grass was so tall, and there was all these bushes. Nobody could see me, driving past. I had to get to the road. So I crawled across the meadow. Still, there's been no cars. Eventually, finally a car did come by. Luckily, the window was rolled down, screamed from help. And they pull over and they come running at me. And I'm like, I was on the ground, because I'm paralyzed, of course. And I didn't want them to worry. I was very concerned about them thinking that I was a lot worse than I was. I was perfectly fine, 100% perfectly fine. Nothing was broken or bleeding. I was perfectly fine. And I'm like, hey, I'm paralyzed, but it's okay. I've been paralyzed for 20 years, and that's why I'm on the ground. And so they go get my wheelchair, and the next day I go to the doctor, and the doctor's just like, you just did all that? Like, yeah, you can fly. You're fine. You're totally fine to fly. And made it back home in one piece.
That's amazing. And for somebody who just really does not like to travel, this is just an amazing story. I mean, I don't even like to wait around and take my shoes off in the airport, let alone rescue myself with New Zealand grass. So there you go.
Yeah. So that was actually like another reason though why I wrote this book, because after then, like surviving that and the parallel of that, and then going through COVID, all of this COVID stuff is happening. And I come back to the United States and everybody is just in sheer panic. And I'm just like, you know what? If I wanted to go, if this was my time, like I had my out, like I could have gone, like, so this COVID thing is not going to get me, period. The end. No questions. Like, that's just it. That's just the story that I'm writing.
Amazing. Amazing. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that you wish that I would have talked about or asked you about, but didn't?
I'm sure there's probably a million things that I could say or think about, like, poetically. But I think the most important thing is for people to work on controlling that perspective. Yep. Controlling that perspective. You're in an awful situation. You have a bad meal at a restaurant. Okay, it's not your favorite meal. It's not a bad meal. There was still care that was put into it. And think about the farmers, who put into growing that food, and think about all the little, the wait staff and the person who even built the building to the restaurant. Think about all these little things to allow this meal to happen in that space and time. That to me is perspective. It's not just about you and, oh yeah, my food's cold, or, I've had better mashed potatoes or whatnot. It's like, there's a lot more things going on in every single moment. So there's so much to be grateful for and appreciate no matter where you are.
Oh, Ashley, thank you so much for being like the most, well, you're delightful, number one, delightful guest on the show. It was wonderful to talk with you today. And I can't wait for my listeners to hear and tell me how much they enjoyed you. So thank you for being a part of this podcast.
Thank you for having me very much.
That's it for this episode. I told you it was amazing. And I encourage you to reflect on how you can use Ashley's story to see what you can do, not what you can't. Remember her, and remember what she said about shifting your perspective. It's all a matter of perspective, and to notice the small things. And now for our end announcements. Don't forget that you can join me and others in the private donation-supported Everyday Sangha that meets virtually via Zoom every other week on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. The Sangha is currently studying the Diamond Sutra. And please consider supporting the efforts of this podcast and related groups by becoming a community member for $5 a month. If you do, you will have access to blogs, members-only podcasts, an education series, a private Facebook group, the Introduction to Buddhism class, and the new bonus contemplation podcasts. If you don't follow me or Everyday Buddhism on any of your social media platforms that we post in, you can go to the Everyday Buddhism website and join the membership community or the Everyday Sangha. Go to www.everyday-buddhism.com and click on the tab that says Join Community or Sangha. I can't stress enough how thankful I am to those of you who do donate, or join our groups. Since I do not seek podcast sponsors and do not ask for financial commitments through paid podcast memberships, my work and the cost of the infrastructure needed to support what I do is entirely self-funded except for your donations. Thanks to all of you who write in with comments and questions. I do read every email message I get, but I can't always respond. Another way you can help is to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It's important to share the podcast with others if you find it helpful in your life. And if you could, take a minute to comment so people know why you love Everyday Buddhism. That's all for the announcement. So until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.